Heart rate is a fantastic data point that you can use in order to individualize your training and become more precise in the way that you build your endurance. But you have to know how to use it intelligently, because if you don't, you're going to run into a few issues. So in this video, I want to give you some advice on how you can leverage heart rate in your endurance training so that you can get the best results. But first, we're going to talk about how not to use your heart rate when you're training, trying to build your conditioning, build your endurance. So for me, the biggest issue today is this: the watches, all the gadgets, all the data. I love data, don't get me wrong, but relying too heavily on what your devices tell you and disregarding everything else is absolutely a problem of our modern world. And one of those things comes in the form of heart rate zones on your watch or whichever device you use to train. And there's a huge problem with heart rate zones. And the main one is that the heart rate zones that your watch gives you are likely not yours, okay? They belong to the aggregate demographic that you belong to, meaning they're averages on a huge data set. And one thing that you have to understand is that you are not the average. You are one data point that is part of the average, but the average is actually nobody, right? It's something that I learned from Carl Jung in one of his books, where he says that the average is actually nobody. And if you want to consider the individual, you have to get out of wide averages on wide demographics. So what I mean by this is that the algorithms, the watches, they're going to take your calculated max heart rate, so typically 220 minus your age, and don't even get into there's better ways of doing this. There is no good way of calculating a max heart rate. And if you do find one, it might be right on the bike, but it'll be wrong on the run or vice versa. Essentially, it doesn't work. And your max heart rate is going to change with training. It's going to change with the age. It's going to change with which modality you're using, running, biking, swimming, etc. So max heart rate is a flawed concept to begin with, and then watches apply fixed percentages to this max heart rate, and they're going to say, okay, 70% of your max heart rate, that's your zone 2. Well, guess what? It might be today, but if it is, and you train properly, it won't be tomorrow. And if it isn't, then you're out of luck, and those zones don't belong to you and don't actually work for your training. So that's a huge problem. Another problem that I see is trying to look at the heart rate that is on your watch and the zone that you're in when you're racing. So for example, some people tell me, Sean, I just did a marathon. It took me 3.5 hours. I was in zone 5 for 3.5 hours. So how can I get better in zone 5 to run a better marathon? Well, guess what? You didn't run your marathon in zone 5. And if your heart said this, or if your watch said that, it's again because those zones don't belong to you. Plus you add the fact that you were in a race setting. Probably more adrenaline, more stress. You are maybe in the heat, which will impact your heart rate. All those things influence how your heart responds. And so the main problem with all of this is being fixated on heart rate in the absence of other data points, of other markers. I'm going to tell you right now which data points you can use and link heart rate to those in a way that is productive for your endurance training. So the first thing I would think of and look at is your RPE, rating of perceived exertion, how you feel, your sensation. And for those that think that this subjective metric is not viable and shouldn't be used in training, well, think again. It's heavily backed by the scientific literature, in addition to being extremely practical in the field. It's even used in pro cycling, where they have all the money in the world to use all the gadgets and constant lactate monitoring and all the stuff that's starting to appear on the scene, all the most advanced tech. They're still relying on RPE. And I was listening to an interview of a cycling coach who said that when he gets youngsters coming up from the junior ranks, they're really good with their power meter. They're really good on the bike. But as soon as you take their power meter away, they don't even know what their name is. And they can't actually manage their effort based on what they feel, which is one of the hallmarks of elite sporting performance. is knowing how to manage your effort, especially in endurance sports. So this is a really important parameter. And so what I would recommend is think of linking a given RPE with a given heart rate, right? So if maybe you're running and you look at your watch and it says 120 BPMs and you had an RPE of 3 or 4, good. That's a useful data point for you, okay? And you're running at 9 kilometers per hour, right? So you have external load, the speed that you're running at, it might be watts on a bike, and you have your RPE, and you have your heart rate. Now heart rate's really interesting. Now heart rate is useful because it's linked to your RPE, which is technically a metric of internal load, the perceptive aspect of internal load, and linked to the external load, which is the work that you're doing outwardly, let's say. So this is a useful way of using heart rate. Another way you could use it is if you, for example, you do a lactate test, you determine that on the bike, your first lactate threshold is at, say, 150 watts. Maybe your second lactate threshold is at 230 watts. And you try to look at the heart rate at your first threshold and at your second threshold. Now, those data points will be interesting, and you can use those to plan your training. But you need to be careful. And what I mean by that is you need to understand that above your first threshold, so when you go into medium or even high intensity and above, heart rate is going to drift no matter what your level is, okay? And obviously it's going to drift less for elite performance than for beginners, but no matter what, once you go above your first threshold, heart rate is going to creep up over time, due to fatigue, and due to the growing inefficiency of the effort at those higher intensities above the first lactate threshold. Okay, so something to really keep in mind. If you're looking at your heart rate when you're doing medium or high intensity work, know that it is going to creep up. This is just how it's going to be. But you can also look at the rate of increase, and that might be a marker of progress, right? Let's say you're in zone 3, right? You're doing tempo intervals, you're doing 15-minute tempo intervals, and maybe you're doing 3 of them on the bike. So 3 times 15 minutes on 3 or 4 minutes of rest, RP 5, something like this. So in the example I gave before, first threshold at 150, second threshold at 230, I might be doing those around maybe 170, 180 at the most. And I want to look at how much my heart rate increases between the beginning of my 15-minute interval and the end of my 15-minute interval, right? So maybe it went up 5 beats on the first interval. And what I would do is keep out the first minute, because that's going to be the kind of the fast component of heart rate increase, the rise, as we would call it. And then you would have the drift between minute 1 and the end of your interval. So maybe it went up 5 beats between minute 1 and minute 15. Maybe on a second interval, it went up 7. And then on a third interval, you're pretty tired, went up 10 or 11 beats between minute 1 and minute 15. Down the line, try it again. A month or 2 down the road, well, maybe now it only goes up 3 beats on the first interval, 5 on the second, and 8 on the third. That's progress, okay? So in that context, heart rate is useful. But again, beyond the first threshold, it is going to drift. And you have to account for this in what you look at. Now, if it increases above the first lactate threshold, it means it should stay stable below the first lactate threshold. And that's another useful way of using heart rate in training, is if you're below the first lactate threshold, if you're doing zone 1 or zone 2 training, you should see a flat line of your heart rate throughout the session. Assuming it's not hot outside, assuming you're not pre-fatigued from something else or from the previous days, we should see an absence of cardiac drift. And that's a good thing to measure your progress in the way of durability. Durability, your ability to resist fatigue and metabolic inefficiency as time increases. So maybe today, let's take our same profile as before, 150 watts threshold 1. So you're doing your zone 2 at maybe 120, 130 tops. And today you can hold an hour and your heart rate is around, I don't know, maybe 110. But when you start to pass the hour, it starts creeping up pretty quickly. So you're probably fatiguing at that point. So if you want to continue and do a longer session, you should slow down. Go down to 110, maybe go down to 100 watts and try to prevent that heart rate from drifting. And if in a month or two you redo that same zone 2 session, but you're able to push to like an hour and a half before your heart rate starts to drift up, that's progress. Okay, and that's a really good way of using heart rate in training as well. So if we wanted to sum it up, what I would say is try not to use your heart rate in isolation. Don't just look at your heart rate and think that this is going to give you any kind of useful information in your training. Rather, try to combine heart rate with an external load metric, watts on a bike, minutes per kilometer or kilometers per hour on the run. Another internal load, which is the perceptive one, so the RPE, or other physiological parameters such as lactate or even muscle oximetry with the MOXY. All those are going to be useful ways of using your heart rate in training to track your progress or even to test yourself at a given point in time. But stop using heart rate in isolation. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about conditioning, I've got a free guide, 4 videos that are ready for you. All you have to do is click the link below to access it. Just give me your email and I'll give you those videos. Thanks for watching. If you have questions, please leave them below. I look forward to making more content for you in this beautiful wilderness, and I'll see you soon in the next video. Take care.